Happy Tuesday night demo night. I'm Chef Aliye Aydin, and I'm a natural food chef and culinary coach. I help people find the time and motivation to make dinner at home. This is my lovely assistant Elizabeth, my sous chef. She's going to be helping me out tonight. So tonight we're making a spicy lentil stew with butternut squash. And this recipe I actually originally got from a cookbook called, what's it called? Everyday, can you go grab that cookbook for me? Just right there on top of there. It's called Everyday Indian Cooking. No, Indian Home Cooking is what it's called. It was published in the, yeah, Indian Home Cooking. It was published in the mid-2000s, and this recipe, the whole point of this recipe is that it can be done with ingredients that are easily gotten at the grocery store, right? And it can be, things can be switched out based upon what's in season. So for this one, we're going to be using butternut squash. I don't know if you guys have begun to see all the hard winter squash appearing everywhere, farmers markets, grocery stores, CSA boxes everywhere. This is a butternut squash we'll be using today, but we could use any number of squashes. You could even use sweet potatoes if you want to. It doesn't have to be a butternut squash. The recipe calls for 1 small butternut squash. This is actually a bit bigger than small. That's okay. And then eggplant too. It's still in season here, kind of the end of the season in Southern California, but we still have it. I have these really cool stripy ones. And really you can use any kind of veggie that you want, that you find at the market, that you feel so inclined to use. The recipe has a ton of stuff. It's tomatoes, butternut squash, eggplant, red onion. I'm reading the recipe here. Corn. I don't have any corn tonight. I didn't get my hands on any, but you can use frozen corn kernels are really good. And then any kind of fresh greens. I'll be using some chard tonight. The recipe calls for fresh spinach leaves, but I would use whatever I had on hand. If you had any arugula or any kind of green that you wanted to use up, you can throw it in there too. Yeah? So the first thing to get started with in this recipe is getting those lentils cooking, because they take the most amount of time to cook. And the recipe calls for 2 different types of lentils. A regular just brown lentil. The kind that, to me, they're a really regular lentil. Just make any kind of lentil soup out of them. They kind of fall apart when they're cooked for a while. And I've rinsed them and drained them. And then the other kind is what's called a tur dal. And I actually got this in an Indian grocery. They come in huge 4-pound bags, so I've had it on my shelf for a while. I've rinsed it and drained it. It's clumped together just because I rinsed it and drained it. It's no big deal. There's just still some water in there. If you don't have any tur dal, which you get in an Indian grocery, you could totally use a yellow split pea. They're slightly different from what I can see, but it's really not a big deal. If all you had was the brown lentils, that's totally fine. If on your pantry shelf you have brown lentils and red lentils, that's totally fine too. Just use what you have, honestly. That's, like I said, the point of this recipe is to throw together all these things for a delicious fall stew, yeah? The key ingredient, I think, flavor-wise, do you want to peel this garlic? Okay. Get a cutting board? Grab a cutting board?
Not that one.
No, grab one in here. The key ingredient in the flavor in this is a spice mix called garam masala, which is a North Indian spice blend that has a few different things in it. Hi, Matt. Everybody has different kind of blends, but this particular one, and there's a recipe under the stew recipe on my website. This particular blend, I'm holding this because this is what I keep mine in once it's all ground up. I've had it for a while. Cinnamon, bay leaves, or you could use curry leaves, cumin seeds, coriander seeds, green cardamom pods, which are relatively easy to find, black peppercorns, whole cloves, dried red chili, and mace. All stuff totally gettable in your regular large grocery store. So you just toast it up and make a little bit of spice blend on your own. You can also buy pre-made spice blend, which is fine, garam masala, but the only difference is that when you make your own, it's going to have a, look, Matt says hi. It's going to have a lot fresher taste to it, yeah? So it's just going to add more flavor if you make your own. And this lasts forever. Honestly, I shouldn't tell you this, but I've had this for a year. I made a huge batch of it last year for a big event that I did. And I still have a little bit left over here. And it smells delicious. Super pungent. You want to smell it? Yeah, it smells a little cinnamony, clovey. And all these spices that are in this and why it's so good for fall is that they're really warming spices. And by warming, I mean you eat them and then you just feel warm inside. It's not necessarily a spiciness, which we do have in this stew, but it's a warming spice, yeah. So I'm going to take these two, that's the garam masala. I'm going to take these 2 lentils and put them in the big soup pot behind Elizabeth's head. Ooh. And then I'm going to add water. Can you measure out water from that pitcher into that right there? Hi, kitty. No, this isn't food for you.
How much?
I think 4.5 cups the recipe calls for. So just a little more than 4. So the first thing you want to do is get started boiling the water with the lentils, right? The recipe says 4.5 cups of water with the lentils. That's good, babe. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and put that water in with the lentils. Just dump them both in.
Just peel the garlic. What should you do? Mince it?
And Elizabeth just peeled the garlic. You're going to wait for them to come to a boil. And as that's coming to a boil, you can get all the other stuff ready. So she's peeled the garlic. You can mince that.
Okay.
If you wanted to grate it on a grater, you could too. I'm going to grate some ginger. My favorite way to do it on my microplane here. I don't even bother to peel it. I just hunked off a piece of ginger from a big hunk that I have. And I'm just going to make about a tablespoon grated on here. I don't even have to worry about peeling it. Because in this stew, everything's going to cook together for a while. You won't notice the skin at all. It's just going to melt right into the stew. So really no big deal. If you did want to peel the ginger, for any other recipe or for this recipe, but if you wanted to, a really easy way to peel that ginger was with a spoon. So I just have a regular eating spoon here, and you can just run the spoon along the ginger and it just peels right off. And you hardly lose any of the actual ginger. If you use a knife to do this, and often you lose a lot of the actual ginger meat to the knife. But this way, it peels right off, just the thin skin. So that's a little tip I use for ginger. But honestly, in this recipe, oops, that went in my cilantro. In this recipe, you can use the whole thing, which is cool. I'm just going to grate. So right now, we're just getting all the aromatics together for the stew. And what's really easy and great about this stew is just like a dump it in the pot stew. You dump in the lentils, you dump in all the aromatics and the spices, and you just let it boil. Cooking, letting all this stuff get soft, and then at the end, you add what's called a tempering oil. In the recipe, I call it a final flavor layer. And you basically just heat some spices and some oil, and then add it separately, and then add it into the stew. And fat, I think I said this last week, fat helps carry flavor. So when you're doing that at the end, you're kind of blooming the flavors of those spices, like making them come alive, and then adding it into your stew. So it's a different way of cooking than we're used to. We're used to the sautéing thing, which is actually a French technique. We're used to sautéing and then building layers of flavor that way. This particular recipe doesn't do the sauté. It just boils all the things together and then adds that fat and flavoring at the end. And that a lot of traditional cuisines tend to do that, I've noticed, when I've cooked traditional recipes. It's it's not the French technique that we're so familiar with. So I think the recipe calls for about a tablespoon of ginger, and I'm getting there. If you really like ginger, add more ginger. That's more of the warming thing for sure. I mean, ginger is really warming. Really good for cold weather and for colds as well. Is that a tablespoon? I think not quite.
Yes, I think it is.
Yeah. What else is in the recipe? Can you scroll up? Ginger.
ginger, masala, turmeric, cayenne pepper, cloves, bay leaves, hot green chilies.
Okay, so and all this stuff is going to be added to the lentils after they start boiling, I'm going to go ahead and just put it all in one spot. So I'm going to put the ginger in here, just a little bowl. Elizabeth's going to put the garlic in there. We're going to measure the garam masala in there while we're waiting. Did anybody watching make their own garam masala? You get bonus points if you do. So I think 2 teaspoons of this. What else? Turmeric. So turmeric, the bright yellow stuff that comes from a root. The root actually looks a bit like ginger, but is bright yellow on the inside. Super anti-inflammatory. On its own, tastes a bit like dirt, honestly. But it adds a nice earthy flavor, so you want to balance it in recipes. And you'll see by the end, this is a super balanced recipe. Lots of flavors going on here. And then the recipe says cayenne pepper, which I leave out for our family because it's just too spicy. The recipe also calls for a couple of green chilies. And if you like spicy chilies, there's little tiny like serrano chilies or even spicier you can use. I leave them out for us because we want everybody to be able to eat it. I like spicy stuff, but we all don't. So, oh, and then the other thing is a little bit of ground cloves, right? So you're seeing all these spices that are kind of, we think of with pumpkin pie spice, fall, winter, right? And the reason that they're used for that is because they're a really warming spice, right? So ground clove, which I've pre-ground. You can buy it pre-ground or you can buy the whole ones and grind them in a grinder. Which I wanted to talk about actually for a second.
Can I mix it?
Yeah, sure. So I do a lot of my own spice grinding, and I actually have a coffee grinder that is only for spices. This thing smells pretty awesome. I think chili or allspice. Allspice is the last thing we did, right?
Yes.
Before that, chili. And I try to clean it out, wipe it out before I do the next spice. You can't really run this thing under water, which is a bummer, but that's okay. I wipe it out because it's electric. You don't want the water getting in there. But you can wipe it out with a paper towel or just don't mind if your next recipe tastes a little bit like allspice or chili pepper or whatever it is. So I ground the cloves in here beforehand, and I'll keep a little bit of that on hand. This is what I made the garam masala in. I just did it in batches with the cinnamon stick and everything. So that's that. Spice grinder. If you're into doing your own spices, I would definitely have one of these on hand. It's super useful. I have about 1 million mortar and pestles. They're really pretty, but I don't use them very often.
They don't work as well.
Yeah, they're harder to get going. When you're really about efficiency, I like to use the electric spice grinder and leave the mortar and pestle for looks. So that the lentils are just about up to a boil. So I'm going to stir them around. And then Elizabeth is going to add the other things. Let's see. What else? So the garlic's in there. It's garlic, ginger, garam masala, turmeric, cayenne, cloves, bay leaves, chilies, and salt. So the only thing that's not in here is the salt. Why don't we put the salt in there? You want to bring the salt over? So it's 2 teaspoons of the fine sea salt. And the sea salt is going to obviously help with flavor, but it's also going to help those lentils start to break down, which is why, and help them cook faster, really. Which is why I like to add the salt at the beginning.
2 teaspoons?
2 teaspoons of fine sea salt. It seems like a lot of salt, but you'll see by the end this vegetable is a mound of veggies. And it cooks down, but that 2 teaspoons of salt is it's a perfect amount, really. I have 2 of those coffee grinders. I don't know what the second half of that means. But yay! Cool. Thanks, Peter, for stopping by. So she's going to dump that in there. You don't need to mix it up, babe. Just go ahead. No. Just go ahead and dump it all in. Along with the bay leaves. I'm using bay leaves here, but you could use curry leaves if you had them as well. I use bay because it's easy. I grow it in my yard, but you can also get it at the grocery store.
Can I stir it?
Yeah, turn it down and stir it. Simmer. low. Yeah, and then cover it up. So she's going to stir that around, and then we'll cover it and let it simmer until they're just about done. You want to stir it every once in a while to make sure it doesn't stick. But otherwise you just leave it alone, let it go. And I get that going, and then I'll chop my veggies. So I'm going to put that lid on now. There we go. I'm going to set the timer for 20 just so we don't forget about it. So veggies in this spicy lentil stew with butternut squash. Obviously the butternut squash, which I showed you before, is here. I think these things can be kind of intimidating to break down. It's just a pretty simple, it's just a couple step process, right? What I do first is I separate the neck, this part here, from the bulb, I guess you'd call it, the body of it, right? Well, actually, very first I take the top off, so I'll cut the top off very first with my extremely sharp knife. That's pretty key here for cutting your own butternut squash. So I cut off the top, and then I'll separate the neck from the body here. And for this use, we actually want to remove the skin. And there's a couple of ways to do that. I prefer to use my knife to remove the skin because I find removing butternut squash skin with a peeler kind of wrecks the peeler. Do you want to get me a peeler? We can try it. But every time I've tried the peeler, I really haven't had much luck. I've had a lot more luck kind of peeling the squash like a watermelon, really. How I do melons or cantaloupe or something. But Liz is she's gonna get the peeler here. We can see if it'll work. Oh my god, 20 minutes of us watching our old video. What? Why? Why are you watching the old video? You know what? This isn't the worst though. It depends on your peeler. These peelers are actually pretty great. These are the Kuhn Recon peelers. They come in sets of 3 on Amazon. There's 3 of them for like $8 or $9. If you go to my Pinterest, actually, A Good Carrot Pinterest, I have my essential kitchen tools there. And one of the things you'll see is this 3-pack that you can get. And these are they stay sharp for so long. So I'm going to amend my whole peel it with a knife. Get one of these peelers. They're called Y-shaped peelers. And they're so much better than those traditional kind. The kind I grew up with just are so dull. I don't think they work very well. But this, you can just peel it right off. It's peeling really easily. Do you want to try peeling it?
Okay.
Elizabeth's going to try peeling it because that peeler is so dang sharp. Right?
Oh, it's actually not as hard.
It's actually, yeah, she says it's actually not so hard.
It's a little different.
And that's actually a dull peeler. This is one of my older peelers. If we use one of the new ones, I'm sure, just watch your thumb. Yeah. So she's going to peel that. I can actually get the other peeler and do this side.
That one's broken.
Ah! How did that one break?
I don't know.
Okay, so they break. That was the first one I've ever seen break. But I have a bunch more of them. Thank goodness. In my knife bag.
There.
Hi, Andy. So here we go. We're peeling it first. Lizzie peeled it. You want to make sure to get off all the hard bits that are like hard skin here. And then we'll peel the other side too. You want to do this bit while I chop it?
Okay. Okay.
I think you can do it. And then you can kind of gather up all the peels. Why don't you see if this one's sharper? Just watch your thumb. You just don't want to shave your thumb off. Right?
Have you done that before?
No, I've never done that before, but you know I've cut myself in a million other ways. Alright, so here's the neck of the butternut squash peeled. And I'm going to just cut it in half lengthwise, keeping that flat bit on the cutting board. And then for this recipe, because it's a stew and it's cooking for a long time, you don't have to worry about getting super small pieces because it's going to simmer for a while. The big pieces will break down just fine. So you could do relatively large chunks, maybe, I don't know, 2-inch chunks or so.
This is kind of too hard.
It's too hard? Okay, that's fine. So because of the shape of this, it's kind of hard. This is back to the bulb part. I'm going to go ahead and do the peeling here. This is going to clean up after me as I throw all the peels on the counter. Sorry, Ann. But you just want to get that hard peel off. because it won't become super soft. I mean, it depends. Sometimes it depends on what time of the season it is. Sometimes the butternut squash peels cook just fine and they become super soft. Other times, not so much. I'm just getting all the peels off. Like I said, you could use any other kind of squash. If you had an acorn squash or a delicata squash. I wouldn't use a spaghetti squash because it's kind of stringy. What other kind of squashes? A kabocha squash. Those are really delicious. The kind of dark green ones. What else?
Green squash?
Green, yeah, green on the outside squash. So there we go. I got most of the peel off there. Pretty good. And to cut this one, I'm also going to cut it down in half. And with this side, we need to scoop out the seeds, right? We have the seeds there. Can you hand me a grapefruit spoon? Okay. You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Don't reach your hand into the knife drawer. One really easy way I find to scoop out the seeds from these is a grapefruit spoon. I have one of these grapefruit spoons that has the ridges, like the serration at the edge, and it's a really easy way to scoop out the seeds. So you don't want the seeds for this particular use. You could wash them and roast them if you want.
Are they kind of like pumpkin seeds?
They are pumpkin seeds. All squash seeds are pretty much the same, except for size, maybe a little bit of flavor difference, but you could definitely, so I got a nice clean squash half, and it comes out really easily with this grapefruit spoon. Regular spoons work too. This is just my little hack that I discovered one day, like, oh look, I can take out the center of a squash with a grapefruit spoon really easily. I love grapefruit spoons. They're great. My grandma used to have them. I thought they were so weird. Anybody else grow up with grapefruit spoons? I love them. Anyways, back to the squash. There's still a little bit of the peel here left. I'm just going to cut off that bottom. And then just cut into chunks, best I can. Bless you, baby. Just rough chunks. They don't have to be super equal because everything's just going to basically turn to mush. I know that sounds slightly unappealing, but that's basically what's going to happen. It's really a pureed soup. The lentils are going to break down. The squash is going to break down. I'm going to kind of cut out that root end. Is anybody cooking a lot with the winter squash? Anybody? Yes? No? Favorite winter squash recipes? Everybody. All right. Lizzie, what's your favorite winter squash recipe?
Pumpkin pie.
Pumpkin pie. Good answer. I
really
like, that's what pumpkin pie is made from originally, right? Is a winter squash. A pumpkin is a winter squash. Right? It just means a hard squash, basically.
I don't like other squash, so that's why.
She doesn't like other squash.
Like, I don't like eating squash. Really.
Right. That's okay. So, squash. We got that done. So we'll put that aside until those lentils are a little bit more cooked, and then we'll throw it all in. Well, you were going to do the eggplant. Why don't you do one of them, and I'll do one of them.
How?
Just chunks like this.
Do you need to, like, peel the skin?
No, you don't. No need to peel the skin on the eggplant. You just chop it up and toss it in.
Do I cut off the top? Or how do I
Yeah, go ahead and cut off the top.
Here. Is it like here or like here?
Yeah, so to cut off the top, I like to kind of peel back. Careful, they can have spikes sometimes on the green bit, but I like to kind of peel it back. Sometimes I'll just take it off with my hand. And if not, I'll just cut it off. Yeah? Then you can just cut it off underneath there. Here, I have a little garbage bowl here. Yeah. And then just in chunks that are a similar size to the butternut squash, so it cuts similar, so it cooks similarly, if that makes sense, yeah? Butternut squash raviolis. Ooh, that sounds good. Can I come over for those? I don't bother to make raviolis, but that is very delicious. That's true. How do you do the filling? Do you just roast the squash, puree it, do you put anything particular in the seasoning? Do you do it with sage? You got it. Any way you do it, babe. I'm actually leaving these pieces pretty big. Bigger pieces will obviously cook slower. Making them a little smaller, I guess. I did this one kind of big and this one kind of small. Let's grab a bigger bowl. And I'm just going to put all the veggies in one bowl because they just got all tossed in at once. So I have the eggplant. No need to salt it or anything like that. Yeah, just go ahead and stick that in there.
I think they're kind of big, but...
No, it's fine. Mine are bigger. What's next? Onion. Last thing, it says a medium red onion. You can use any kind of onion you have on hand. The red's a little bit sweeter, I find. But anything you have on hand, really, is fine. Again, just the big chunks, because the stuff's just going to boil away. So I'm going to cut it in half. Peel it. I want to make sure this is still simmering. Oh, yeah, it's going for sure. I'm going to stir it just to make sure it isn't sticking, because there's no oil in there for the lentils, right? So you want to make sure you stir it periodically just so it isn't sticking. And it's on a nice low setting, just the lowest it'll go. Just peel off all the papery stuff of that onion.
Could help, but I don't want to.
That's fine, you don't have to help if you don't want to. And then, do you want to mince some cilantro for the next thing?
All of it?
Yeah.
Where'd it go?
Yeah. So again, just chunks with the onion, totally fine. That's what this is really a stew in that sense. Like, just chop it all up and throw it all in. Right? Does anybody use lentils on a regular basis? Anybody? I make a Turkish lentil soup sometime. Lentils are used a lot in Mediterranean, Middle Eastern cooking. So I use the brown lentils quite a bit when I'm making the stew. The Turkish style lentil soup. And there's also the red lentils. Is that what they're called? They're orange, but they're called red. I always get confused because they're orange to me, but they're called red lentils, and I think it's so weird. I don't know if they're red when they're growing or something. I'm not really sure. But Liz is just mincing the cilantro over here. And I'll just do big chunks on these onions.
I kind of want to use your knife, but you're using...
No. Well, you can use my knife. So Liz wants to use my big knife for the mincing of the cilantro, which is easier. So when you mince the cilantro or any kind of herb, why don't you come up here? Just go ahead and leave it on there and just plunk it up there. It's fine. So she's working on some cilantro for this final tempering oil layer at the end. And she keeps the tip of the knife on the cutting board and then bring that herb back. There you go. And she finds it easier with the big knife to keep the tip of the knife on the cutting board, right? And it doesn't have to be super fine. That's pretty great like that. Is the onion making you cry?
Wow. Okay, where should I put this?
Just leave that there for now, I think. You're fine. Put that aside. Why don't we check our recipe, yeah? So, we have all this stuff in there. Ooh, tomatoes. That's the other thing we need. This cilantro is for the end, so I'm going to go ahead and put that aside. Oh. Don't go wash your hands. Okay, don't rub your hands in your eyes. Let's see, what else? The tomatoes.
I need another cutting board.
Well, I'm just going to go ahead and do this, unless you want to help. Get the small green one out. Sasha, are you here now? Are you still watching my old video? Is she the one in the corner? I think that's her.
Why was she watching the old video?
I don't know why she was watching the old video. You just wiped your nose. She wiped her nose. I said, go wash your hands. She's going to do one of these tomatoes, again, just in big chunks. Oop, I'm gonna rinse my knife. We're almost good with those lentils are almost there. She's catching up. We were somehow watching Chicken. Which one was that? Like 2 weeks ago.
No, yeah, 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. Yeah, I need to look more into like the live, like how to tell people where to go. I just assume to tell people to go to my A Good Carrot page. Maybe that's weird. I don't know. Diana. Nice. Yeah, butternut squash are absolutely delicious. I agree. Pretty classic Italian recipe from what I understand. I don't know a lot about Italian cooking, but definitely classic. Those onions are making me cry too. God.
I think it's your cutting board because I was over there and I was crying and then like I came
I think it's all this stuff right here. So we're just tomatoes in chunks. I'm just taking out the top. If tomatoes are no longer in season where you are, you can totally use canned tomatoes. It's fine. Or even tomato paste would be fine too. Maybe, I don't know, maybe a couple tablespoons for this big pot. You'll see it's gonna make a huge pot. We have a cat here thinking he wants food. He doesn't like vegetables. All right. So she's doing an amazing job. Wow, she's getting fancy. Watch your hand. Cutting the tomato there. Why don't you do that up here and show everybody what you did?
Why?
Because your technique is really awesome. I'm going to move that for you. Just watch that thumb. She's doing it in nice small pieces. Even though it doesn't have to be, she's practicing her knife skills here. She's doing great. I love it. Good enough, right? It's totally what this is about. Good enough. Kat, I don't have anything for you. Hey. So these lentils are plumping up nicely. Super fragrant with all that stuff that we stuck in there. Yum yum. And then we're going to add these veggies. Go ahead and put all the juice in there. Add all these veggies and let it go again for a while, I think. Spinach. Oh, the spinach, right. So for the spinach, I didn't have any spinach, so I'm using a couple of leaves of chard from the garden. You can add whatever you want, like I said earlier. Chard, arugula, spinach. Leave it out. You don't have to put greens in there if you don't want to. That's fine. I'm just going to put all the veggies in one bowl. All right, no corn, okay. We're going to add 2 more cups of water, I think. It says add 2 more cups of water. Can you measure the water here? That's okay.
Put it in?
No, not yet. Hang on. Let me taste this and then you can put it in. I'm just tasting to see how soft these lentils are. Yeah, they're totally getting soft, but they're not mushy. That's perfect. So yeah, go ahead and pour the water in, and then I'm going to put this nice big bowl of veggies in. Onion, tomato, eggplant, butternut squash. Yeah. And go ahead and turn it up, babe. And we're going to turn the heat back up.
To medium high?
To high, because we want it to boil again. So we turn the heat back up to high and because we want it to boil again, we'll turn it down again and let it simmer. And at this point, it looks like strange, right? These vegetables are completely coming out of the pot. It seems like it's never going to fit, but they're going to cook down a ton. And basically what the photograph looks like, if you're looking at the photo there in the recipe, it's going to end up looking like that eventually. What I'm going to do is, can I stand up?
Yes.
is I'm going to take from the bottom and kind of turn up to the top, because keep in mind there's no oil in this recipe yet, so chances for sticking are kind of high, so you just want to keep your eye on that so that your stuff doesn't stick. Kind of just keep checking the bottom, stir around. With no oil, lentils they tend to stick a little bit, definitely. So, hi Andy, hi Cassandra. So we're just put all our veggies in our lentil stew. It smells really amazing here. And we're going to wait for it to come to a boil again and then simmer it again till the veggies are soft, maybe 15-20 more minutes. And then we'll be good. I'm just stirring it all around right now to get everything incorporated, making sure none of the lentils are sticking to the bottom. My sous chef is off duty. She's leaving. She's out. But what's cool about this too, I actually just have one more step in this recipe. It's hardly anything. So if you're just joining us, we're making a spicy lentil stew with butternut squash. And the other veggies that went in there are eggplant, there's some tomatoes. What else? You can use any kind of seasonal veggie you want. You can use different types of hard winter squash, pumpkins. You can use sweet potatoes if you want. If there's no tomatoes left in season, you can use canned tomatoes. You can leave the tomato out completely. You could use tomato paste if you wanted to. This recipe is really meant to be one that you can just use whatever's in your pantry. I had these brown lentils, which are just kind of your standard lentil in my pantry. And then I had these yellow, they're called tur dal, that I got at the Indian grocery, kind of a yellow lentil. You can also use a yellow split pea if you don't make it to the Indian grocery. Super straightforward. Okay. Also put the garam masala in there, which is the nice warming North Indian spice blend. It's got cinnamon and nutmeg and cloves and all sorts of yummy stuff in there. There's turmeric in there. There's ginger, there's garlic. We didn't put any chilies in, but totally do if you're into spicy stuff. I'm making it kind of family friendly, so I don't make it super spicy at all. It's very warming stew without being spicy, which is really nice for cooler weather. I'm just going to rinse off my cutting board real quick. And get to the tempering oil, which is what I call in the recipe, if you're looking at it, the final flavor layer. And it's the only fat left in the recipe, or it's the only fat in the entire recipe. And basically what you do is you bloom or make the spices come alive by kind of cooking them in some oil and then toss them in at the end. And that's it. And it seems like a super maybe basic step, but it really helps the entire stew come alive. I mean, this is delicious as it is, but once you add that final flavoring layer, it just kicks it up so many notches. I can't tell you. So we're almost at a boil here, making sure they're not sticking. Already the veggies are totally cooking down. Like, there's so much water in these veggies, and veggies in general, that it's just going to cook into a nice, delicious mass of fall, yummy stew. We're getting there. The veggies are almost already completely submerged in the liquid. And I just use water. There's so much flavor in this stew that you don't even need like a broth or anything. Water is totally works. Like a chicken stock or veggie stock. Nope, you don't need that. Spices totally do it for you. So the final thing I'm going to do, let's see, black mustard seeds. Ooh, I'm going to, for that final tempering layer, I will add more onion. And for that particular onion, it will be chopped finely. And it will be chopped more finely because it won't be cooked very long at all, right? So when things are cooked for longer, you can cut them into bigger pieces because they'll break down slower and they'll have that time to break down. This final tempering layer, it's only going to be, it's just going to get fried a little bit. So you want it kind of small because I don't really like biting into big chunks of onion. So we're going to dice it and then fry it up with some spices and go from there. This onion is super weird. I just take off all the weird bits here. If you don't have red onion, use a different kind of onion. Totally fine. So I'm going to peel both sides. It calls for one small onion. It's kind of bigger, but I'm going to throw it all in anyways. There we go. And then go ahead and dice it super small. So this is your chance to practice your knife skills here, right? So I'm going to put it flat down on the cutting board, and I've cut it in half already. And I'm going to put my palm there on the onion itself. And you'll see that I've left the root end intact here, right? Scoot this over here. I've left that root end intact, and I'm going to cut through, but just all the way down to the root. I'm not going to cut through, right? So I'm going to make these slices here, right? But it's still intact, and you want to leave that root end on so that you can do this without your onions sliding all over the place. We're just about at a boil. Please hold. All right, almost there. So we've cut this into slices with the root end still intact. We're going to go the other direction. So we're creating a grid, which is going to give us our nice dice. So I've gone both ways. I have it going one way and then the other way. And then I'm going to go across. And so I will get a nice small dice out of this, which will be really good little bits of onion in the soup that aren't too strong, aren't too big. When I get down to the root end, I just cut around it. I have my onion. I'll do the other half again if you didn't see it. Let's see, where's the place you can see best on the cutting board? There we go. The root end there is intact. I'm going to cut through, but not all the way through. Yeah. With my heel on the top of heel of my hand on the top of the onion. And then cut through, but not all the way through to the root. The root on this end is, the root on this half is barely together there, so it's a little more wiggly. And then across, I'm going to get some nice small onion pieces. And then when I get to the root end, I just cut around it and cut the root out. You don't really want this root end in there. It's hard, it won't cook very much. So there's my onion for my final flavoring layer, my tempering oil. Just going to go ahead and put my onion in a bowl. And over here on the stove, I will do that in a second. My stew is up to a boil. I'm going to stir it, cover it, and put it aside to simmer for however long it'll take those to get nice and soft, maybe 20 minutes or so. Almost up to a boil. Who likes to drink wine while they cook? Sasha. Who else is with me besides Sasha? This Facebook is being weird. It tells me all these people are watching and then it tells me nobody's watching. So that spicy lentil stew, butternut squash, almost done. We're going to do now what I call the final flavor layer. And I'm going to measure out some spices here. And it goes kind of fast, so I like to measure everything out in advance. So I have my black mustard seeds, which are from the mustard plant. If you don't have, oh good, that's cool. Hang out with me. If you don't have black mustard seeds, you can use yellow mustard. I haven't tried it yet. I don't know what it would be like. I think it would be less flavorful. Everything's in the pot. Good. Good, good, good. The yellow mustard is less flavorful, so you might want to use a little bit more. For these black mustard seeds, they're relatively easy to get in my experience, really. I mean, so I just have a teaspoon of these. So I'm going to put them there, measure them out. And then you'll do a little bit of garlic too, again. And just a little bit of minced garlic. That's a tiny clove, but that's okay. Tiny little clove. And basically what you do is just fry up the red onion with some cumin and the black mustard seeds. And that's it. So you throw in some cilantro and lemon at the end, and then you just scrape all that into your stew, and it just adds this wow factor. I love it. It's so good. Okay, so we have the red onion, the garlic, the cumin. Cumin ready to go. Cilantro is ready to go. It's over there. I got my lemon. I'm going to juice it, my half green lemon. Great, and then I will throw that in too. And lemon is always really good with anything lentil, because lentils are so earthy that the lemon really helps brighten the flavor of any lentils that you're cooking. So I always keep lemons on hand for any kind of lentil soup, or just serve them along with it too, so that people can add their own acidity to it as they want to. All right, that is really going. Stir it one more time. All right, there it goes. Now we're going to do this final flavoring layer, and then that's it. This final flavoring layer, in the recipe I say to use refined coconut oil. And refined, because refined coconut oil doesn't have any kind of flavor to it. It's basically been mechanically pressed, so the flavor has been taken out. You can also use avocado oil, which is what I'm going to use today, because I have some avocado oil, some coconut oil somewhere, but just a flavorless oil. You could use olive oil too. If it was kind of a milder olive oil, I think would totally be fine in this. I like the avocado oil because it's really high in the omega-3s and an anti-inflammatory in your body. That's the thing with all the veggie oils, is that they tend to be more inflammatory, like the regular veggie oils, all that stuff. So I kind of keep those out of my kitchen. I just use olive oil, avocado oil if I need a neutral oil for high heat, refined coconut oil, and I think that's about it that I use. Yeah. So what we're going to do is just heat the coconut oil with the mustard seeds and let them crackle a little bit. So it's this 5 tablespoons, which is a little over a quarter cup. I'm not sure if I have quite enough. I might do a combination of avocado oil and olive oil. That might be enough, actually. And I just have a little frying pan here on the side that I heat that up in. And then I'm going to dump in those mustard seeds and just cook them until they start to pop. Just a teaspoon of them. 1 or 2 minutes. Let's see if we can see if everything's popping. It's like on a medium-high heat. Ooh, my stew stopped boiling, so I'm going to turn it back up again. You just want to be sure to keep that stew at a simmer so it's continually cooking. It smells amazing. Those are about to start popping in a second. And what this is doing is just opening up those spices, opening up all those flavors by cooking the spices in the oil or the fat. You could use ghee too. You could use butter if you wanted to. Any of those things would work. And then we'll add the chopped onion and the cumin. I think it's a teaspoon of cumin, yep. And that's what we cook for a while. Kind of get it nice and browned at the edges. Ooh, you hear them? They're starting to go. So they're just popping a little bit, and then I'm going to go ahead and throw in the onion and the cumin and stir it for about 4 or 5 minutes. So you're browning those onions just a little bit by cooking them on the high heat, and that's adding another flavor layer to the stew as well, kind of those browned onions with the cumin. Yeah, and I don't want to let it burn. Ooh, that is boiling. So what I love about this stew is that it makes a really super big batch, and because we have so much food in our refrigerator right now from all kinds of different demos and events and blog posts, that I will probably freeze the stew once it's done, or at least most of it, and it really heats up really well at a later date. Just make sure when you freeze it that you label it with a date always, because you always think you're going to remember what's in it, and you never do. I never do. I always think I'm going to remember what's in it, and I never do. And then I have to throw it out because I don't know what the heck it is or how old it is. So be sure to label the thing that you freeze. But the only important thing with freezing is that you want to be sure to cool it overnight in the fridge first so that it's completely cold, and then put it in the freezer. You want to be sure it's completely cold before you stick it in the freezer, yeah? So what I do with this stew is I will cool it completely. I will often put it in a big ice bath, so I have a big bowl. I fill that with ice, and then I put my pan of stew in it, and I just stir it continually to make sure it cools off well. And then once it's cooled off, I'll put it into smaller containers that I might freeze. Or once that pot that I cooked it in is completely cooled off, I'll actually just stick that whole pot in the refrigerator if I'm certain that it's cold. And I'll let that hang out overnight in the refrigerator, and then I'll spoon it into my containers for freezing, which will either be like a plastic deli container. I hate using the plastic, but I don't have a lot of luck with freezing in glass. About half the time the glass breaks. And I often do the mason jars. With the mason jars, you have to be sure not to fill it all the way to the top, because as liquid freezes, it expands, right? And then it pops your mason jar. So just a couple more minutes on those onions. So freeze it either in the plastic deli container or a mason jar, but refrigerate it first overnight, label it. I like to freeze it in portions that I think I'll use, so I don't like to freeze a gigantic portion of it unless I know that I'm going to take it out and serve 8 to 10 people with it. I tend to do it in smaller portions first, so that I have the choice of, oh, I'll feed 4 people with this, or oh, we're having a party or bringing it camping. 8 to 10 people are going to have this, so I'll bring like the whole portion. But doing it in smaller sizes makes it more versatile, right? And then also, like on a weeknight when you're not sure what's for dinner, you can easily just grab out some stew and I just slowly heat it in a pan so as not to burn it. It takes a little while to heat it up, but that's okay. Maybe 20 minutes to heat it up slowly in a pan. Make sure you boil it for 10 minutes to get rid of any sort of bacteria in there. And then you have soup. And this one is really good because there's no pasta or anything in it. It doesn't overcook or anything, right? So if you freeze a soup that has, say, pasta in it, when you reheat it back up again, that pasta is going to get kind of mushy. But this one pretty much stays the same. It's really great that way. So, ow. These onions are browning at the edges, which is exactly what you want. And then I'm going to stir in the garlic, stir in the cilantro, and add the lemon juice. I turn it down a little bit so I don't burn the garlic. Oh, the spoon is too hot. And then I'm going to stick in the cilantro. And then I'm going to take it off the heat, add the lemon juice, but this is what I have. Just a nice, it smells so good. Onions, cumin, mustard seeds, cilantro, yeah. And then I'm just going to add a squeeze of lemon juice. And you can also add more. Let me get my squeezer. This is a hard lemon. Like I said, you could also serve it with lemon on the side. Go ahead and squeeze that lemon in there. Sometimes those are more trouble than they're worth, honestly. And then I'm going to go ahead and just shove it into that pot once those veggies are done. And then taste and adjust for salt or add more lemon if you want, but that's pretty much it. Smells good, yeah? So just to show you what it looks like, this is the spiced lentil stew. You can see all the veggies are in the pot there. I'm going to let it go for a little bit longer so that it gets a little bit softer. The veggies are just done. And then I'm going to throw in that flavor oil that I made and let it cool. So I hope you've learned something from this. We made the spiced lentil stew, or spicy lentil stew, with butternut squash. It's a really great fall recipe. The warming spices and the garam masala, and also the cumin and cloves and all these other types of spices in it. It's really good for freezing. It's really good for feeding a large crowd. And you can find the recipe on my website at agoodcarrot.com. If you search in the search function, or you can scroll down. Thank you, Sous Chef, for helping me today. She did some really good shopping today. And hopefully you enjoy the stew, and let me know if you have any questions at all, or if you have any requests for future live sessions. If there's anything that you want to see, that would be super great. Hi Faraday, we're just finishing up right now. We're just done. The stew is just about ready. It's been about an hour, so I'm signing off here for Facebook Live. I will see you guys next week. I think I'm going to do some tacos next week. I'm kind of debating what I might do. So we'll see you guys then. All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye.